What do you do when the man you built your life with decides to tear it down in front of the whole world? For Eleanor Vance, it wasn't a question. It was a reality. The night was supposed to be a triumph. The St. Jude's Children's Foundation Gala, the pinnacle of New York's philanthropic society. But her husband, the formidable Julian Vance, had a different kind of debut in mind. He stood there dripping in Tom Ford and arrogance, with a younger woman clinging to his arm like a victory medal. He thought he was showing off his new prize. He thought he was publicly demoting his wife of 20 years. What he didn't know was that while he was busy planning his affair, Eleanor was busy planning an empire. And tonight, the main event wasn't his mistress. It was her. The silence in the back of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was heavier than the crystal decanter of whiskey that sat untouched between them. It was a specific kind of silence, one that Eleanor Vance had become a connoisseur of over the past 3 years. It wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of a chasm widening, a low tectonic rumble of a marriage slowly breaking apart. Outside, the glittering lights of Manhattan streaked by a city alive with 1,000,000 stories, while hers felt like it was grinding to a halt. "You look appropriate, Eleanor," Julian said, his eyes not leaving his phone. The word appropriate was a dagger wrapped in silk. It meant she was presentable. It meant she fit the role of Mrs. Julian Vance, the elegant, understated wife of a real estate titan. It meant she was not exciting, not new. She smoothed down the front of her navy blue Carolina Herrera gown. It was classic, exquisitely tailored, and screamed old money. It was everything Julian used to say he admired about her. "And you look ready to close a deal, Julian," she replied, her voice calm, a placid lake over a raging current. He was wearing a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, so sharp it could cut glass. On his wrist, the Patek Philippe she'd bought him for their 15th anniversary gleamed under the car's ambient light. It was a testament to a time when he looked at her, not through her. For 20 years, Eleanor had been the perfect partner. She had a degree in chemical engineering and an MBA from Wharton credentials she'd quietly shelved to help Julian launch Vance Holdings. She'd been his strategist, his confidant, the ghost writer of his most brilliant speeches, and the mother of his 2 children, Liam and Sophie. She had orchestrated his rise from an ambitious broker to a king of the New York skyline, all from the sprawling, sterile elegance of their Upper East Side penthouse. She had been the architect. He was the name on the building. But over the last few years, the foundation had begun to rot. It started with late nights, he explained away, as investor dinners. Then came the separate vacations for decompressing. The final undeniable proof came from a private investigator she'd hired 6 months ago, a man named Mr. Davies, with tired eyes and a folder full of glossy, heart-breaking photographs. The woman's name was Chloe Sterling. She was 26, a social media influencer whose entire brand was built on a curated fantasy of luxury. A fantasy Eleanor knew with nauseating certainty was being funded by her husband. Tonight was the St. Jude's Children's Foundation annual benefit gala. It was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, an evening where fortunes were pledged and reputations were cemented. Julian had been uncharacteristically insistent they attend together. "We need to present a united front." He'd said the nickname, a relic of a forgotten intimacy. There are whispers. This will silence them. Eleanor knew he wasn't trying to silence whispers about his infidelity. He was trying to manage his brand. A divorce would be messy expensive. It was far better to keep the dignified wife on his arm while he enjoyed his dalliances. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. He wanted to use her one last time as a shield. As the car pulled up to the grand entrance of Cipriani Wall Street, with its soaring marble columns and Grecian grandeur, a knot tightened in Eleanor's stomach. The flashes of paparazzi cameras were like a volley of gunfire. Julian's hand rested on the small of her back, a possessive, performative gesture. He smiled for the cameras, a brilliant, predatory flash of white teeth. Eleanor offered a more reserved, enigmatic smile of her own. He thought her smile was for the photographers. He was wrong. It was for her. It was the quiet, steady smile of a woman holding a royal flush, waiting for the river card to be dealt. Inside the ballroom was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers hung like constellations, casting a warm glow over a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air hummed with power, the low murmur of billion-dollar deals and social maneuvering. Julian was in his element, gliding through the crowd, shaking hands, his voice booming with false bonhomie. Eleanor followed a step behind the dutiful shadow. She saw them before Julian did. David Chen, CEO of a rival tech investment firm, gave her a brief, sympathetic nod from across the room. He'd tried to warn her subtly at a lunch months ago. "Julian's taking a lot of risks lately," he'd said, his eyes kind. "Make sure your own portfolio is secure." She had appreciated the gesture. Further on, Beatrice Astor, the reigning queen of society gossip, watched her with hawk-like intensity, her lips pursed. Then Julian's posture changed. A genuine smile, one Eleanor hadn't seen directed at her in years, lit up his face. He was looking towards the grand staircase. Descending it was a vision in crimson. Chloe Sterling. Her red dress was a stark, screaming contrast to the muted elegance of the room. It was cut dangerously low, slit impossibly high, a dress designed not to be admired, but to be noticed. Her hair was a cascade of blonde extensions. Her lips were plumped to an almost cartoonish degree, and she moved with the practiced, hip-swaying confidence of someone who knew she was being watched. And she was heading straight for them. "Julian, darling," she cooed, her voice loud enough to turn heads. Julian didn't flinch. He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. He simply turned his hand, dropping from Eleanor's back as if she were suddenly radioactive, and enveloped Chloe in a hug that was far too intimate for a public setting. "Chloe, you made it." "Stunning as always," he purred. He then turned to Eleanor, his eyes cold and challenging. "Eleanor, you know Chloe Sterling, of course. My new head of brand development." Head of brand development. The title was so absurd, so insulting, it was almost laughable. The crowd around them fell into a conspicuous silence. The whispers started instantly, a ripple of schadenfreude spreading through the room. Eleanor could feel hundreds of eyes on her, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They were all waiting for her to crumble, to cry, to make a scene. Eleanor looked at Chloe, at her perfectly constructed face and her desperate, hungry eyes. She saw a young woman who had mistaken attention for respect and lust for love. Then she looked at her husband, the man who was so drunk on his own ego that he thought he could orchestrate this public humiliation and suffer no consequences. She extended a perfectly steady hand to the younger woman. "Miss Sterling." Eleanor said, her voice a cool, clear note in the suddenly quiet room. "A pleasure to finally meet the woman who's been handling my husband's assets." Chloe's smile faltered. Julian's face darkened with fury. But Eleanor wasn't finished. She held her gaze a queen on her own chessboard and let a small, knowing smile touch her lips. The first move had been made, but the game was far from over. The air crackled. For a moment, no one moved. Julian's hand, which had been resting proprietorially on Chloe's waist, tightened. He looked at Eleanor as if she were a stranger, a dangerous variable he hadn't accounted for. He had expected tears, a retreat, a quiet scene in the car on the way home. He had not expected this cool, lethal precision. Chloe, recovering quickly, gave a tinkling, artificial laugh. "Oh, you're funny, Mrs. Vance. Julian has told me so much about your sense of humor." She squeezed his arm. "He's just so brilliant, isn't he? The way he's expanding the Vance Holdings brand into the lifestyle sector is pure genius." "Is that what we're calling it?" Eleanor replied, her gaze unwavering. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her quiet disdain was more potent than any shout. She took a deliberate step back, creating a small, visible space between herself and the sordid little tableau they presented. In that single movement, she was no longer part of their triangle. She was an observer, a judge. Julian's jaw was a hard line of granite. "Eleanor, that's enough," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. He grabbed her elbow, his fingers digging into her arm. "Don't make this difficult." "Difficult," she repeated, looking pointedly at his hand on her arm until he released it. "I believe you're the one who brought your brand development to a charity event for sick children. I'm merely making introductions." The barb hit its mark. Several people nearby who had overheard the exchange shifted uncomfortably. Bringing a mistress to a society function was one thing. It was a tawdry common sin. But to do so at the St. Jude's Gala, an event meant to symbolize hope and compassion, was a new level of crass. Julian, ever the performer, quickly tried to regain control. He plastered on his public smile and steered Chloe away. "Come, darling, I must introduce you to Robert Sterling from the board. No relation." He boomed a terrible forced joke. He shot a final venomous look back at Eleanor, a look that promised retribution. As they walked away, a perfect power couple. In their own deluded minds. Eleanor stood alone for a moment. But she wasn't alone. She could feel the collective gaze of New York's elite. She knew what they were thinking. Poor Eleanor. So graceful, but so humiliated. He's finally traded her in for a newer model. Pity was a poison, and she could feel it seeping into the air. Her longtime friend Maria materialized at her side, a flute of champagne in her hand. Maria was her former chief of staff, from the early days a fiercely loyal woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. She was the only one who knew the full story. "Are you okay?" Maria asked, her voice a low murmur. "I'm better than okay," Eleanor said, taking the champagne. The cool glass was a welcome anchor in the swirling heat of the room. The first act went exactly as planned. His face, Maria smirked. "I thought his $1 million dental veneers were going to crack." And her. She looks like she got her dress from a website that ends in ru. Eleanor allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "Be kind, Maria. She's just a pawn." "Pawns get taken off the board," Maria countered dryly. "Are you ready for Act 2? "Almost." Eleanor said, her eyes scanning the room. She watched Julian parade Chloe around, introducing her to his powerful friends. He was doubling down, trying to normalize her presence, to force the world to accept her as his new partner. Each handshake, each forced laugh, was another shovel of dirt on the grave of their marriage. He was so confident, so arrogant. He truly believed he held all the power. He saw Eleanor as a liability to be managed, a relic to be discarded. He had no idea she was a weapon waiting to be fired. For the next hour, Eleanor played her part to perfection. She mingled. She accepted condolences disguised as pleasantries. "Eleanor, you're looking radiant," one woman purred her eyes, screaming, "How brave of you to show your face. Such a stressful time for you, I'm sure." Another clucked sympathetically. She simply smiled, nodded, and moved on, a ghost of grace haunting the festivities. She saw David Chen again, leaning against a marble pillar, watching the scene unfold. He caught her eye and raised his glass in a silent toast. It wasn't a toast of pity. It was one of respect. He knew something was happening, even if he didn't know what. The main course was served a dry, uninspired filet mignon. The orchestra played a soulless rendition of a Vivaldi piece. The small talk ebbed and flowed. All the while, Julian and Chloe held court at the center table, laughing too loudly, touching too often. They were putting on a show, a coronation of their illicit affair. Julian caught Eleanor's gaze from across the room and gave a small, triumphant smirk. He thought he had won. He thought the public humiliation was complete, and that she would now retreat, broken, to negotiate a quiet, favorable divorce. Then the lights dimmed slightly. The orchestra quieted. A man in a tuxedo walked to the podium on stage. It was Richard Sterling, the chairman of the St. Jude's Foundation. "Good evening, everyone." Richard's warm voice echoed through the hall. "Thank you all for your incredible generosity tonight. It is because of you that we can continue our life-saving work. Every year, this gala is made possible by a select group of sponsors. But this year, one sponsor has stepped forward with a level of vision and commitment that has truly left us speechless." A hush fell over the room. Julian sat up straighter, a preening look on his face. He was a major donor, though not the main sponsor. He probably assumed Richard was talking about him. "This year's title sponsor is a new company." Richard continued, a note of excitement in his voice. "A company built on the principles of sustainable innovation and long-term vision. It's a company that believes in building a better future, not just for our generation, but for the generations to come. They came to us with an anonymous, record-breaking donation, the largest in this gala's history, on one condition: that they be allowed to announce their launch here tonight, among all of you." The room was buzzing with speculation. Who was this mysterious benefactor? Julian leaned over and whispered something in Chloe's ear, and she giggled. He was probably taking credit, somehow. "This company is poised to revolutionize the green technology sector," Richard said, his voice building to a crescendo. "It is my distinct honor to introduce you to the future. Please join me in giving a massive round of applause for our main sponsor, Ethelgard Innovations." The name hung in the air. Ethelgard. It sounded old, powerful, noble. No one had heard of it. People looked around, confused. Julian frowned. This wasn't one of his competitors. Richard wasn't finished. "And please welcome to the stage the visionary founder and CEO behind it all." He paused for dramatic effect, a wide smile on his face. "A woman of incredible strength, intelligence, and grace. Mrs. Eleanor Vance." The world stopped. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound in the grand ballroom of Cipriani Wall Street was the faint, shocked exhalation of 600 of New York's most powerful people. The name Mrs. Eleanor Vance echoed off the marble columns and hung in the air like a lightning strike. Julian Vance froze a piece of filet mignon halfway to his mouth. His face, which moments before had been a mask of smug satisfaction, slackened into utter uncomprehending shock. His head swiveled towards Eleanor, his eyes wide with a confusion so profound it was almost comical. Chloe Sterling's perfectly painted smile dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed stare. She looked from Julian to the stage and then to Eleanor, her mind visibly failing to process the information. And Eleanor rose. She stood up from her table at the edge of the room, the navy-blue Herrera gown now seeming less like a symbol of quiet resignation and more like the midnight sky, deep, powerful, and full of hidden stars. The spotlight found her, and a collective gasp swept the room. It was her, the scorned wife, the woman they had all been pitying for the last hour. As she began her long, deliberate walk to the stage, the story of the last 18 months played out in her mind, the real story, the one that had unfolded in secret, while Julian was busy dismantling their life. It had started not with a bang, but with a quiet decision made at 3 in the morning. She was sitting in her home office, the PI's photos spread across her mahogany desk. Photos of Julian and Chloe in Paris, laughing on the Pont des Arts. Photos of them dining in a private room at Percé. The pain was a physical thing, a cold, heavy weight in her chest. But beneath the pain, a long dormant ember of anger began to glow. She had given this man the best years of her life, her intellect, her ambition. And for what? To be discarded like a piece of outdated technology. She could fight him. She could hire the most vicious divorce lawyer in the city and drag him through a public, humiliating battle over his assets, their assets. But that felt like his game, a battle fought on his turf by his rules. It would be a victory, perhaps, but a hollow one. No, she wouldn't fight him for what he had built. She would build something of her own, something better. The next morning she had called her family's estate lawyer, Eleanor's grandmother, a formidable woman named Ethelgard. A name that meant noble protector had left her a substantial trust fund. It wasn't Vance money. It was her own, a legacy of strong women that she had never touched content in the life she had helped Julian create. The time had come to claim it. With an initial seed capital of $50 million, she began to work. She reconnected with Maria, who had left Vance Holdings years ago, tired of Julian's ego. Maria signed on as her COO without a moment's hesitation. "I've been waiting for this call for 10 years, she'd said. They rented a discreet office space in the meat-packing district under a shell corporation. The sign on the door said EV Consulting. While Julian thought she was at lunch with friends or attending charity board meetings, Eleanor was deep in research and development. She revived her passion for chemical engineering, focusing on the one field Julian had always dismissed as tree-hugger nonsense, sustainable technology. She assembled a small, brilliant team of scientists and engineers, headhunting them from MIT, Stanford, and Caltech. They were young, hungry, and believed in her vision. They worked on developing a new type of biodegradable polymer derived from algae, a material that could replace single-use plastics in everything from packaging to medical supplies. They developed a revolutionary carbon capture technology that was smaller, cheaper, and more efficient than anything on the market. For 18 months, she lived a double life. In her penthouse on the Upper East Side, she was the quiet, increasingly distant Mrs. Vance, redecorating the guest room and managing the children's social calendars. Downtown in their sulk, white-walled office, she was Evie, a driven, visionary CEO, poring over schematics, negotiating with patent lawyers, and securing supply chains. The late nights Julian attributed to her insomnia were spent on video calls with manufacturing plants in Germany. The spa weekends were trips to a research facility in California. She named her company Ethelgard Innovations in honor of the grandmother whose foresight had made it all possible. It was a name rooted in strength and legacy, a perfect counterpoint to the hollow vanity of Vance Holdings. 6 months ago, when Mr. Davies delivered the final irrefutable proof of Julian's affair, she didn't just file it away for divorce proceedings. She saw it as a deadline. Ethelgard needed to launch. It needed to be born into the world, not quietly, but with a thunderclap that would shake the very foundations of the world Julian inhabited. Sponsoring the St. Jude's Gala was a masterstroke suggested by Maria. It was the perfect venue. It was Julian's world, his stage. By becoming the main sponsor, she would be hijacking his narrative. She wouldn't just be announcing a company. She would be making a declaration of independence. The record-breaking anonymous donation was made through a series of offshore accounts completely untraceable back to her. The organizers only knew they were dealing with a representative of a mysterious new firm. Richard Sterling himself had only learned her identity an hour before he stepped on stage. Now, as she approached the steps to the podium, the ballroom was utterly silent. She could feel Julian's stare like a physical blow to her back. It was a look of pure, unadulterated fury and betrayal. He felt betrayed. The irony was so thick she could taste it. She ascended the stairs, her movements fluid and confident. Richard Sterling shook her hand, his eyes wide with admiration and shock. He, like everyone else, had known her only as Julian Vance's wife. Eleanor stepped up to the microphone. The bright lights were warm on her face. She looked out at the sea of stunned faces. The captains of industry, the society mavens, the power brokers. And then her eyes found his. She looked directly at her husband, the man who thought he had broken her. And she began to speak. Eleanor adjusted the microphone, the small movement echoing in the cavernous, silent hall. She did not look at any notes. She didn't need them. She had been writing this speech in her heart for 18 months. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm and steady, carrying a warmth that belied the steel in her spine. "Richard, thank you for that generous introduction, and thank you all for being here tonight to support the truly miraculous work of St. Jude's Children's Foundation." She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the room. She made brief, meaningful eye contact with people she had known for years, people who had just spent an hour pitying her. She saw their expressions shifting from shock to intrigue to a dawning, electrifying respect. For a long time, she continued, "I have lived a life of quiet privilege, a life dedicated to supporting the vision of others, and there is honor in that. There is strength in being the foundation upon which great things are built." Her gaze flickered for just a second to Julian. His face was a thundercloud. He understood. This was about him. "But I believe there comes a time in every person's life and in the life of our society when we must ask ourselves, what are we building, and more importantly, why?" She leaned forward slightly, her tone becoming more passionate, more engaging. She was no longer just speaking. She was commanding the room. Are we building towers of glass and steel that serve only to glorify our own names? Are we chasing fleeting trends and hollow validations? Or are we building a legacy? Are we building a future that is cleaner, healthier, and more hopeful for the children this very foundation works so tirelessly to save? A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd. She wasn't just giving a corporate speech. She was touching on a universal truth, tapping into the philanthropic spirit they were all there to celebrate. That is the question I asked myself. And my answer is Ethelgard Innovations. Ethelgard is not just a company. It is a promise. It is the promise that profit and purpose can and must coexist. It is the promise that the most brilliant minds of our generation can be put to work, solving our greatest challenges. She began to detail her work not with dry corporate jargon, but with vivid, powerful language. We have developed a biopolymer that will make single-use plastics obsolete, a material that returns to the earth as harmlessly as a fallen leaf. We have engineered a carbon capture system small enough to be installed on a single smokestack that can do the work of a small forest. This isn't science fiction. This is the science of now. And it is being manufactured right here in America, creating jobs and revitalizing communities. She could see David Chen in the audience. He was no longer leaning against the pillar. He was standing, his arms crossed, a look of profound admiration on his face. He wasn't just seeing a competitor's wife. He was seeing a visionary, a peer. For too long, Eleanor's voice rang out clear as a bell. I have been silent. Many of you here tonight have known me for years, but you have not truly known me. You knew me as a wife, a mother, a hostess, and I am proud to be all of those things. But tonight, I am here to reintroduce myself. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am the founder and CEO of a company that is going to change the world. The finality of her words was absolute. She was not asking for permission. She was stating a fact. The world is changing, she said, her voice softening, now becoming more personal, more intimate. And we can either be dragged along by the current, or we can choose to build a better vessel. We can choose to leave behind the things that no longer serve us, outdated ideas, toxic relationships, unsustainable practices, and embrace a new beginning. This time, her eyes locked with Julian's, and she did not look away. The message was unmistakable. It was a dagger delivered with a beatific smile. Every person in that room understood the double meaning. The gasps were audible. Beatrice Astor looked as if she might faint from sheer delight. Our donation to St. Jude's tonight is more than a gift. It is our first investment, an investment in the future, in hope, in new beginnings. Thank you, she finished. The silence held for one more heartbeat, a moment of collective awe. Then the room exploded. It started with one person, David Chen. He began to clap not politely but with genuine enthusiastic force. Then Maria. Then Richard Sterling on stage next to her. And then the entire room rose to its feet, a tidal wave of thunderous applause that shook the chandeliers. They were clapping for the donation for the company, but most of all, they were clapping for her. For the sheer unmitigated audacity of it. For the woman they had all underestimated, who had just executed the most elegant public act of self-reinvention they had ever witnessed. Amid the standing ovation, Eleanor looked one last time at her husband's table. Chloe was staring at her, her face a mask of pale, dawning horror. She was realizing in real time that she hadn't attached herself to the most powerful person in the Vance family. She had bet on the wrong horse. And Julian. Julian was not clapping. He was sitting rigid amidst a standing crowd, his face a grotesque portrait of incandescent rage. His empire had been built on perception, on power, on the unshakable image of Julian Vance. And in 10 short minutes, His quiet, appropriate wife had stolen his spotlight, exposed his affair, and established herself as a new, formidable power in his world. He had come here tonight to humiliate her. Instead, she had just delivered his eulogy. The applause eventually subsided, but the energy in the room had been irrevocably altered. The polite, staid atmosphere of the gala had been replaced with a palpable buzz, the kind that follows a lightning strike. Eleanor descended the stage not as a victim, but as a conquering hero. She was immediately swarmed. Eleanor, that was breathtaking, gushed a banker whose wife had given her a pitying look not an hour before. Your biopolymer technology. My firm would kill to invest. Can I have my assistant call? Your office? Demanded a venture capitalist, shoving a business card into her hand. Darling, you were magnificent. A true phoenix. Beatrice Astor exclaimed, grabbing both of Eleanor's hands. Julian must be so incredibly proud. The final comment was a masterclass in passive-aggressive glee. Eleanor handled it all with a serene, unshakable grace. She smiled. She accepted cards. She promised meetings. She was no longer just Julian Vance's wife. She was the hottest commodity in the room. Maria appeared at her elbow, acting as a de facto bodyguard and chief of staff, deftly managing the flood of well-wishers and opportunists. Across the room, Julian's table had become a toxic island. People were actively avoiding it. Chloe looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She was frantically typing on her phone, probably watching her social media notifications explode with news of the night's true star. Her crimson dress, once a symbol of audacious arrival, now looked cheap and desperate. Julian finally stood up. He moved with the stiff, jerky motions of a man trying to contain a volcanic rage. He pushed through the crowd, his eyes locked on Eleanor. His intent was clear. David Chen intercepted him halfway. Julian. David, said his voice calm but firm, placing a hand on Julian's chest. Not here. Not now. Get out of my way, Chen. Julian snarled, trying to shove past him. I don't think so, David said, not moving an inch. David was leaner than Julian, but he possessed a quiet strength. You're going to walk out of that door quietly before you humiliate yourself any further. For a moment, it looked as though Julian might throw a punch. The two men titans of their respective industries stared each other down in the middle of the most watched party of the year. But Julian, for all his flaws, was not stupid. He knew a public brawl would be the final nail in his coffin. With a guttural sound of pure frustration, he spun around and stormed towards the exit, not even glancing back at Chloe. Chloe watched him go, her face a crumpled mess of panic. Her ticket to the good life had just walked out the door, leaving her stranded and exposed. She gathered her clutch purse and scurried after him, a sad, glittering afterthought. With the immediate threat neutralized, Eleanor excused herself from the fawning crowd. Maria, handle this. I need a moment, she murmured. She slipped away through a side door that led to a small private balcony overlooking the financial district. The cool night air was a relief. The city sprawled before her, a glittering tapestry of lights. Each light was a window, a story, a life. For so long, her story had been confined to one of those windows, tied inextricably to Julian's. Now she had built her own skyscraper. The door to the balcony opened behind her. It was David Chen. That was the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen, he said, coming to stand beside her at the railing. He wasn't looking at her with pity or even just admiration. He was looking at her with the deep, profound respect of an equal. "Thank you, David," she said, a genuine smile touching her lips. "And thank you for running interference." "My pleasure," he replied. "I've never liked bullies. And what he's been doing to you, well, he had it coming." He paused, looking out at the view. "So Ethel Gard Innovations. Your grandmother's name, Eleanor, was surprised. You knew her." "My father did. He said she was the smartest person he ever met, a force of nature. Said it was a crime she never ran her own company. It seems she finally has." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes, the first emotional crack in her carefully constructed armor all night. They weren't tears of sadness, but of gratitude and release. She would have liked to hear that. They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments before David spoke again. "For what it's worth, Eleanor, what you're doing is revolutionary. My fund, Chen Capital, we focus on sustainable tech. We would be honored to be considered in your next round of funding." It was a staggering offer. Chen Capital was one of the most respected tech investment funds in the world. An investment from them wouldn't just be money. It would be a stamp of ultimate legitimacy. "I'll have my office call your office," she said, echoing the words of the venture capitalist inside. But this time, it was different. It was a conversation between two power players, a potential alliance being forged in the cool night air. This was her queen's gambit. She hadn't just exposed her husband's affair. She had sacrificed her marriage, her old life, her public persona, as the quiet wife, all to put herself in a position of ultimate power. She had turned a personal humiliation into a professional triumph of epic proportions. She hadn't just left the gilded cage. She had melted it down and forged it into a crown. The drive home was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the calm after a storm, the quiet hum of a new engine running smoothly. The Rolls-Royce Phantom was the same, but the woman sitting in the back was not. Julian was waiting for her in the penthouse. He hadn't bothered to turn on many lights. He stood silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of Macallan 25 in his hand, looking less like a king in his castle and more like a predator in its lair. "What was that?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft, laced with menace. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She walked over to the bar, took out a crystal tumbler, and poured herself 2 fingers of the same expensive scotch. She took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the smoky fire burn down her throat. She was done being intimidated. That, she said, finally turning to face him, was a product launch. "A product launch," he scoffed, taking a step towards her. "Don't play games with me, Eleanor. You've been planning this for years, lying to my face, while living in my house spending my money." Eleanor let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound he had never heard from her before, and it made him flinch. "Your money," she repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. "Julian, let's be very clear. Ethelgard was funded by my grandmother's trust, a legacy you were never entitled to, and this house, this penthouse that you love to brag about. We both know that my family's investment was the down payment that secured the loan for your very first building. In a way, I've been funding you from the very beginning." His face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful—" She cut him off, holding up a hand. "Let's not resort to name-calling. It's so beneath a man of your stature." Her sarcasm was razor-sharp. "You thought I was at the spa, I was at a materials science lab. You thought I was redecorating the guest room, I was designing a corporate headquarters. You thought I was quietly weeping into my pillow over your sordid affair with a child who thinks brand development means posting selfies on a yacht. I was building an empire." She took another sip of scotch, her eyes never leaving his. You made a classic arrogant mistake, Julian. You saw my support as weakness. You saw my silence as consent. You didn't just underestimate me. You forgot who I was. He was momentarily speechless, struggling to process the scale of her deception, her ambition. He had always been the star, the visionary. The idea that she had been outmaneuvering him in secret was an existential blow to his ego. He fell back on his usual tactics threats. "I'll ruin you," he hissed. "I'll bury that pathetic little startup of yours. I'll drag your name through the mud. I'll take you for everything. I'll make sure you never see the kids again." Eleanor simply shook her head, a look of profound pity on her face. "No, you won't." She walked over to the marble coffee table and picked up a thick, leather-bound folder that had been placed there earlier by her assistant. She tossed it onto the table in front of him. It landed with a heavy, final thud. "What is this?" he demanded. "That she said is a copy of the divorce petition I filed this morning. It cites adultery with extensive, irrefutable proof." She gestured to the folder. "In there, you'll also find a forensic accountant's full report on Vance Holdings, the one that details precisely how you've been embezzling corporate funds to finance your little girlfriend's lifestyle. The trips, the cars, the jewelry, the apartment you leased for her in a building owned by your own company, defrauding your shareholders. I believe the SEC would be very interested in that. So would your board of directors." Julian's face went white. He stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. As for the children, Eleanor's voice turned to ice. "Liam and Sophie are 17 and 19. They are old enough to know the truth, and they are old enough to choose who they want to live with. Who do you think they'll choose, Julian? The father who cheated on their mother and embarrassed their entire family, or the mother who just became one of the most inspiring women in the country?" He had no answer. He was checkmated. Every threat he could make, she had already anticipated and neutralized. He had come here for a fight, but the war was already over. He had lost. "Get out, Julian," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "My lawyer has already had the locks changed on our other properties. You can stay at a hotel. Your things will be sent to you." He looked at her, a strange mix of hatred and disbelief in his eyes. He was seeing her for the first time, not as his wife, but as the most formidable opponent he had ever faced. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the penthouse, out of the life they had built, and out of her story. The heavy door clicked shut, and in the ensuing silence, Eleanor Vance stood alone in the center of the room, not in the ruins of her old life, but on the foundation of her new one. 6 months later, the sky from Eleanor's office was a different color. From the penthouse she had shared with Julian, the view had been of Central Park, a manicured quadrangle of green, hemmed in by the jagged competitive skyline of old money. It was a beautiful view, but a contained one. Here, from the 78th floor of the sleek, soaring tower in Hudson Yards, the view was of the Hudson River, a wide, powerful artery flowing out to the endless expanse of the sea. It was a view of possibility of horizons, and it was entirely her own. The headquarters of Ethelgard Innovations was not just an office. It was a statement. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of ideas. Sunlight streamed through triple-glazed, energy-efficient glass, illuminating open-plan workspaces where brilliant young engineers sketched ideas on smart glass walls. Living walls of ferns and mosses purified the air. And the quiet hum was not of oppressive silence, but of focused creative energy. On a central wall in the reception area, The Forbes magazine cover was framed. The photo showed Eleanor not in an evening gown, but in a simple, elegant blouse, standing in one of their labs, a confident, knowing light in her eyes. The headline was iconic, "The Noble Protector: How Eleanor Vance Built a Green Empire in Secret." Her success had been meteoric, but not accidental. It was the result of relentless work and strategic brilliance. Ethelgard's biopolymer-branded Ethelplast was now in the final stages of a multi-billion-dollar deal with a global beverage conglomerate set to replace the plastic in all their bottled products within 5 years. Their carbon capture technology had been successfully piloted in a German steel plant, exceeding all efficiency projections. The company, which had launched with a $50 million seed investment, was now valued at over $4 billion and had yet to even go public. Maria entered the office without knocking a tablet in her hand and a warrior's glint in her eye. "The vultures are circling again," she announced, foregoing a traditional greeting. Sterling Nash just tried to poach our entire lead engineering team for the carbon capture project, offered them double their salaries and a corner office with a view of their boss's parking spot. Eleanor didn't even turn from the window. Sterling Nash was a lumbering old guard energy conglomerate, one of Julian's key allies. This was the third such attempt they'd made in 4 months. "And what did Dr. Aris say?" Eleanor asked, referring to her head of engineering, a genius in her early 30s, whom she'd personally recruited from MIT. Maria's smile was triumphant. She told them, and I quote, "I wouldn't trade my work here for a controlling interest in your fossilized company." Then she sent a team-wide memo titled "Some Dinosaurs Don't Know They're Extinct," which I thought was a nice touch. Morale is sky high. Eleanor finally turned a genuine warm smile on her face. "Send a case of that ridiculously expensive champagne to Aris likes to the lab, with a note that says, 'Thank you for believing in the future.'" This was her leadership style, empowering her team, trusting their loyalty, and rewarding it lavishly. She didn't rule by fear as Julian had. She led with inspiration. As Maria left, Eleanor's gaze fell upon a different tablet on her desk, open to a financial news site. The headline was smaller, less celebrated. "Vance Holdings stock tumbles as founder. Julian Vance faces SEC sanctions." A small, grainy photo showed Julian leaving a courthouse, his shoulders slumped, his once perfectly tailored suit looking rumpled and too large for his diminished frame. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, not even the ghost of anger. It was like reading about a stranger, a character from a book she had finished long ago. The reports she received from her lawyers painted a grim picture for him. He was a man buried in litigation, abandoned by his fair-weather friends. His power, which had seemed so absolute, had been a house of cards built on perception and intimidation. Once the perception was shattered, the whole structure had collapsed. As for Chloe Sterling, her 15 minutes of infamy had expired. After a few desperate weeks of trying to leverage her notoriety, she had been publicly exposed for faking brand partnerships. Her social media presence had imploded, and the last anyone had heard, she was back in Ohio, living with her parents, the crimson gala dress, likely folded in a box, a souvenir from a life she had almost grasped. The true victory, however, was not measured in stock prices or tabloid headlines. It was measured in the quiet moments that now defined her life. That evening, she was meeting her children for dinner. She left the office at 6 o'clock sharp, a boundary she strictly enforced, and took a hybrid car, one of Ethelgard's fleet vehicles, to a quiet Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village. Liam and Sophie were already there, arguing good-naturedly over the last piece of focaccia bread. Seeing them whole and happy was a balm to her soul. The first few weeks after the gala had been difficult. They were caught between the public narrative and the private reality, confused and hurt. But Eleanor had been patient. She had answered their every question with unvarnished honesty, admitting her own pain, but framing her actions as a necessary reclamation of her life. And slowly, they had understood. "Mum, you won't believe the draft patent application I reviewed today." Liam began, his eyes bright with an intellectual fervor she recognized from her own youth. His internship was not a vanity project. He was a genuinely valuable member of her legal team. It's a new catalyst for the polymer process. It increases yield by 12%. It's elegant. Sophie rolled her eyes, but with affection. Leave it to my brother to call a chemical process elegant. I visited the NYU Environmental Policy Department today. I spoke to a Professor Albright. When I told her who my mother was, she practically offered me a scholarship on the spot. It was kind of embarrassing, but also really cool. "I'm proud of you both," Eleanor said, her heart swelling. "You're finding your own paths." "We had to," Liam said, his expression turning serious. "We saw what happened when someone loses their path." He hesitated, then added, "Dad called yesterday." Eleanor kept her expression neutral. "Oh, how is he?" "The same," Liam sighed. Bitter, blaming everyone but himself. He wanted to know if I could look at some documents at the office for him. I told him no. I told him my loyalty was to the company and to you. Sophie reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. "We've got your back, Mum. Always. What you did, it was for us, too. You showed us how to be strong." In that moment, Eleanor knew she had done the right thing. She had not just built a company. She had rebuilt her family on a new foundation of honesty and mutual respect. She had broken the cycle of toxicity that Julian had created and given her children a new legacy to inherit, one of resilience, integrity, and courage. Later that week, she had a dinner meeting scheduled with David Chen. It was at a discreet Michelin-starred restaurant where conversation was more important than being seen. Their companies had officially entered into a strategic partnership, and their quarterly review had been a stunning success. But tonight, the agenda felt different. David was waiting for her, and he stood as she arrived. It was a small, courteous gesture, but one that spoke volumes. In 20 years of dining out, Julian had never once stood for her. "Eleanor," he said, his smile genuine. "You look happy." "I am," she replied, and was surprised by the simple truth of the statement. "It's been a good quarter. It's been a landmark year," he corrected her gently. "I was thinking about the gala the other day." "Were you?" she asked, taking a sip of water. "I try not to." "You should," he countered. "Not for the bad memories, but for the pivot. I've seen hostile takeovers, dramatic IPOs, corporate coups, but I have never seen a single individual so completely and elegantly change the entire game in one night. It's already becoming a legend, a Wharton case study in the making." "I wasn't trying to make a case study," she said quietly. "I was just trying to survive." "No," David said, his gaze direct and sincere. "That's what you would have done if you'd taken a quiet settlement. That night you weren't surviving. You were conquering." They talked for hours. They spoke of technology, of the future of the world they hoped to build. They discovered a shared passion for modern art and a mutual dislike for pretentious tasting menus. There was an easy rapport between them, an intellectual spark that was exhilarating. It wasn't the fiery, possessive passion she had once mistaken for love with Julian. This was something calmer, deeper, and infinitely more real. As the evening wound down, David walked her to her car. The air was crisp, the night clear. "Eleanor," he began a little hesitantly. "This partnership between our companies is one of the best I've ever been a part of. But I have to be honest. I'm interested in exploring a partnership that extends beyond the boardroom." Eleanor's heart gave a flutter, one she hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't fear or anxiety. It was anticipation. She looked at him, at this kind, brilliant man who had truly seen her from the very beginning. She thought of the woman she had been 6 months ago, stepping out of a Rolls-Royce into a nightmare of her husband's making. And she thought of the woman she was now standing on her own 2 feet, the master of her own destiny. "David," she said, a slow, radiant smile spreading across her face. "I think I would like that very much." She got into her car, and as it pulled away, she looked back not at the restaurant, but up at the glittering skyline. She had done more than just start a company. She had started a new life. The dawn wasn't just coming. For Eleanor Vance, it had already arrived. Eleanor Vance's story isn't just about revenge. It's about resurrection. It's a powerful reminder that our greatest challenges often hide our greatest opportunities. She took the ultimate public humiliation and transformed it into the ultimate public triumph. She shows us that you should never ever let someone else write your story or determine your worth. While one person was busy trying to tear her down, she was quietly building her own kingdom on her own terms. Her story proves that the most powerful response to betrayal isn't to fight on their level, but to rise so high that they can no longer reach you. What did you think of Eleanor's incredible comeback? Was her move at the Gala the most epic power play you've ever heard? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If her story of strength and resilience inspired you, please hit that like button. It really helps our channel grow. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own power. And of course, if you love stories about turning the tables and creating your own destiny, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new story from us. Thank you for listening.